Leadership today, in my opinion, is probably harder than it has been in the past because you got 4 different generations in the workforce right now, and they're all learning at different levels and how they operate. You've got the baby boomers still there. You got Gen X, you got millennials and Gen Zs. So you've got all these different personalities and different generations. It's difficult to be a leader and to do it correctly.
Anybody that is named Jason, I already like him automatically, so that just makes it easy. Um, but outside of that, it was just such a fun conversation that we had, and obviously the thing I was doing was I'm trying to find strategic partners and things, and I said, the way that the consulting and things that you do, not necessarily, because you are working with massive organizations where I'm not. I'm usually working with smaller players in the private space and stuff like that. But anyway, our conversation was just so good. I was like, man, I gotta have you on the podcast. And then to find out, you're like, this is the first podcast you've been on. I was like, man, you're like made for this. So
Well, I hope so. I was so intrigued with our conversation. I was really pumped. You inspired me truly, to the point that I ordered your book that day. I've since read it. I have since wrote many notes in your book. It was absolutely a phenomenal book. It's the basics, and I have hopefully a potential client right now that, as I was taking notes from the book, I was actually putting their company's name in my notes because
that's awesome.
it's the same company, similar, a construction company that is trying to scale up, and they know their pain points. They know where their issues are at. And I'm like, this is absolutely perfect. Matter of fact, if we get them as a client, I am going to buy the book and give it to them.
Oh, well, nice. Well, thank you. That I wasn't expecting that. No, that's very kind. Yeah, no, it's been fun, and I think that, Matt, I'd love to just like ask you some questions about you. And I know we talked
Sure.
about this, but now we can kind of go back in history. So, like, where did you come from? What's your background and all the things? Like when people ask, who's Jason Garnett? What's your all those things, and then we'll just go
So
from there.
So Jason Garnett was a 22-year-old individual who had a little girl at the time. I had a wife at the time, and my daughter's mother, and I was going to school, and obviously she, was in school and she got pregnant. So I needed a job. I was working for the mall. I used to play college basketball, big into basketball, and so, but I had to take care of my family. So I always wanted to be a state trooper, and I ended up going to corrections because they were hiring at the time, and I needed more money. I was working at the mall as an assistant manager in a jewelry department. And so, but I needed more stability. I needed insurance, better wages. And so I started there, and that's where my career started. My father worked in corrections. I had an uncle that worked in corrections. And they rose through the ranks, but I'm like, what better place? And, 31 years later, I retired, and I hit every step that you could except the director. I was the assistant director for the Illinois Department of Corrections. I was I wouldn't say I was the youngest, but I was one of the younger wardens. I was a warden at 32 years old. I held an executive leadership position for 21 plus years. And that was as at that level, you're an at-will employee. So you're hired by the governor. So Illinois is an extremely political state. For those that don't know. And so I was able to survive by the grace of God. There's no doubt about it. Through different administrations, Democrat and Republican administrations. And I was kind of seesaw up and down, but I stayed at that executive level. I was promoted and demoted in the same administration and promoted back in the same administration based on politics. And I learned a lot through the years in the process because the goal was to get to the finish line and be able to have my retirement and pension. And it was a very interesting ride, which is why I'm where I'm at today with my company, with leadership. I had a lot of great mentors throughout my career. a lot. I met one, matter of fact, 2 days ago in a grocery store, and we sit
No
there and
kidding.
talked.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
he was just, he was one of those guys that, as you come up the ranks, because of the way he led, you wanted to follow suit. You didn't want to let those mentors down, and how the hard work and just the knowledge that they had. So I learned a lot, and I tried to come up with my own style, but I was never afraid to go back and ask when I didn't know.
Yeah,
So
that makes
I know
sense.
you'd asked me some, when I was preparing for this, trying to, because I didn't know what to expect. You had asked me, tell me, I don't want to take over your stuff, but tell me um, some of your challenges you had as a leader and some of the things that maybe I possibly did well at. And part of that is based on my leadership code when I do workshops is my failures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I try to perfect over time. Um, so especially as a young leader, made a ton of mistakes. So,
Yeah, I was gonna ask. So, I mean, if you don't mind sharing some of those, like, what would what are some like defining failures that you've had?
so defining failure, I have 12 of them, and this is for any leader.
Nice.
You have to be open-minded. So at 32 years old, and you're running an institution, roughly 300 to 400 people in that institution. Um,
Now, are those sorry?
2000
Are those the like employees, like people that you were director over as
them,
the warden? Okay.
yes.
Wow. Yeah.
Uh, and then you have possibly, 1,500 to 2,000 people as people that were incarcerated. And it's a huge responsibility because one of the things that I always, as a major, as I worked up the ranks, I could always take it to the warden. I could always take it to the boss. But when you're sitting in that seat, the buck stops with you.
Right.
So I always felt like I always had to have all the answers, especially being that young. And you don't have to have all the answers. And throughout time, I realized that now I didn't have all the answers, but I knew where I could go get the answer, which was the key. So being open minded, you know, being that young, there's a little arrogance, little cockiness. Just be truthful,
Oh yeah.
and so be open minded, ego free.
Mm,
Check your ego.
yep.
Um, Excellent decision making, which I didn't. Some of these I did better than others. So one thing about my decision making was I wasn't always quick to react because I was still learning the process, and so that's one. Patience. I'm a go-getter, so sometimes my patience was not the best. I want things to happen quickly, but when you're dealing with a bureaucratic organization, it's like turning the Titanic. And I just wrote an article about that. It doesn't happen quickly. Um, Compassion. Um, you have to have compassion for people, especially the ones that you're overseeing, you're serving.
Yeah.
Um, that's lost a lot, especially in my field. People see them as throwaways. Um, my thought process was, I don't know what you did to get in here. It's not my place. My job is to ensure you do whatever the judge says you're supposed to do, and you go home when you go home. That's the key. And not only for the people you serve, but the people you work with. I'll give you a story. I had an individual um, that was kind of a pain in my side as an employee. He didn't want to come to work. And so eventually one day I got an opportunity to discharge him. And I was proud of myself. He was a pain. He wouldn't come to work. Um, so he missed so many steps and we were able to let him go. A couple weeks later, I received a phone call from his wife. And she asked me, could he have his job back? And I'm like, huh? I'm like, he was let go. I can't let him have his job back. And she said, well, I don't work and we have a sick child. And now that he's been let go, we have no insurance. And so it really hit me hard because, you never, I didn't think about people outside of him, you know, how it affected somebody else, the ripple effect. and unfortunately, he still didn't get his job back. But moving forward, I learned from that process because it involves more than just that individual.
Mhm.
And so, as I made decisions for the rest of my career and throughout, I always try to look and see who else this is going to affect. Sometimes it can't change the outcome, but at least you take it in consideration.
Yeah.
Because I put myself in their shoes. I had a young family. What if I was to lose my job? What would happen to us?
Yeah. Sure.
So I kept all that in the back of my head in any decision, especially when you were dealing with discipline or just a difficult employee or a person you're serving. Another one of my core leader things is truthfulness. These really sound simple, but they're not always that simple because sometimes it's hard to tell people the truth when it's going to affect them
Oh,
difficultly.
right. Yeah.
And the best teacher for this for me was the people that were incarcerated. I had an individual tell me one time, he said, I was a deputy director at the time, and he said, "Sir, are they going to let me out of segregation early? I'm eligible." And I said, "No, they won't." I said, "You are eligible." And they've never let anybody out on the first 90 days. After the second 90 days, they will review you again. Then, if you haven't caused any problems, they will release you. And he looked at me and he said, "Thank you. Now I can get my mindset, and I know I'm going to do another 90 days in segregation."
Yeah. Hmm.
And just being honest, he said, "You're the first one that's been honest with me." I said, "Now, by policy, yes, you can be released, but they're not going to."
Not going to happen. Right.
Right. And then
Huh.
transparency. Um, I learned this a little bit more as I moved up the ladder because there's times I didn't think you could be transparent. In certain situations, you can't, reveal a lot of stuff. Um, but I learned to be able to navigate that more. And not that I uh, told anybody lies or anything. Sometimes I couldn't speak on it. But you try to be as forthcoming as possible and have integrity. You know, I had an individual tell me one time, um, didn't care for me, but he says, "You always treat us fair. You follow the policies, you follow the procedures, even if we don't like you or you might not care for us, you always treat us fair." And
Yeah.
that's integrity.
Hmm.
Um, humility. You have to be humble, because tomorrow, these positions that I was in, they didn't have to have a hearing. They could just call and say, "You're done." So you humble yourself. Um, team mindset. So I told you earlier I played basketball, so I've always
Yeah.
been that team mindset.
Oh, I saw your ring too. Now I'm curious about was that a
That's just
championship?
No,
Okay.
that's just my wedding ring. Then my
Dude,
wife
that's
gets
awesome.
mad. See, my wife gets mad because she's like, "Nobody thinks that's a wedding ring. It looks like a college or a Super Bowl ring or something." And I'm like, "That's not the case."
You're like, hey, I won the ultimate championship, right? I'm
I
married to
did. I
you.
got hurt. I like that, so I'm gonna use that. See, I'm a world champ.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I really believe, especially the older I got, the team mindset. I want to build a team, and I am going to be the dumbest one on my team.
Ooh, that's good.
That is my philosophy. I don't want to be the smartest one on the team. I want to construct a team that you know what you're doing, kind of like you have you're on that stagecoach and you got all those horses in front of you. You're just guiding and you letting them do what they do. Self-awareness. Know what you're good at. Know your strengths. Know your weaknesses. It's like, I know this is not me, so I'm gonna go to Jason. This is his thing. I don't have a problem saying I don't know. That really, I found that over time, that really shocked people if they would come to me and I don't know, but I'll get you the answer. Or if somebody, this happened a lot too. If you came up with an ideal and I had to go present, come on, Jason, you're gonna go with me because I believe in giving credit where credit's due. So if I think it's a great idea, then I'm going to have you get up and speak on it. I'm not going to take your idea like it's mine because I've seen people do that many a time. And what I ended up doing was when I knew it wasn't their ideal, I'd start questioning them on it. And they couldn't answer it because they didn't think it all the way through, like the other person who come up with the ideal. And then, so I did that. And lastly was listening. Just listen to people, listen to different perspectives. I might think I have it all figured out, but when you bring other people in, they might give you a nuance that you wasn't even thinking of.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
especially the farther you go up, because the less you hear or the less people will be truthful with you. And so I had a mentor when I was assistant director, and I think approximately we had anywhere from 26 to 30 facilities. I could call somebody in each of those facilities, and it was not the top four in charge. It could be a dietary worker, could be a maintenance guy, somebody that would tell me the truth, what was going on in that facility, so I could keep a hands on it. And I never let the wardens or assistant wardens know how I knew this information. You find a way to present it and see what they're going to tell you. But these people who truly cared about, their jobs and what they did. So that's kind of the way.
Man, that's so good.
I had a mentor that was excellent at that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's you, because you're right. I mean, and I don't work. So at when you were assistant director, it was how many people total were under your purview?
So we was approximately around 12,000 employees.
That's wild. That's wild.
And it was a lot. It was a whole lot. I loved my job, and I had a great boss at the time. He was absolutely awesome, and I mean, he taught me things. Talking about a humbling experience. We were both up for the director's position, and he was coming from another state, and I'm thinking, what does this guy know about the state he's coming from? What's he know about Illinois corrections? And so he got the job, and we had a meeting, and he's the one that promoted me to assistant director. He goes, I love the way you think. You need to be my assistant director. And I tell people all the time, one thing he taught me, I wasn't ready to be the director. This guy's knowledge was off the charts. And he educated me. And today we're best of friends. He's an older gentleman. I could call him if I was in a pinch. He would kind of walk me through some things. Just very knowledgeable individual, and had been all over the world. I was pigeonholed, never judge a book by its cover. But this gentleman had been all over the place and experienced so many things, and he was willing to share them with me. So,
yeah, man, that's amazing. So, and even just like the way you were communicating about the people that you're serving, like people that were incarcerated. I mean, I know when we talked, our first conversation, my dad's best friend, he was one of the trainers for Montana Highway Patrol, and Montana, I was the whole Montana Law Enforcement Academy, and it's really easy to get jaded in a lot of situations. And so I'd imagine that, especially being in corrections, that'd be really easy to get jaded. And
right.
And how, not just yourself, but how did you also help teach that with everybody that was under your employer, whether you were a warden or just moving up in the ranks when you were younger, all the way to assistant director? Like, how do you help that mindset? Like, we're not getting jaded here. We're here to serve.
So one of the things that I did, I used to tell this to my people all the time. The only difference between us and them is they got caught and we didn't. Think about it. Yeah. I mean, we've all done something that could have put us in there. Yeah. Maybe not purposeful. Could be something as simple as drinking and driving and have an accident and, kill somebody. I had a gentleman that was on parole, and we were releasing him from parole early. He was a model parolee. And so on that form, one of the criteria was you have a job and how much you're making. So when they sent it to me for approval to move forward to the prisoner review board, they had on there, this guy was making over 10 grand a month. And I'm like, that's a typo. So I called the supervisor and I'm like, he's not making 10 grand a month. This is a typo. And he's like, well, we know you review all this. So we wanted you to call because he is making over $10,000 a month. I was like, what's he do? and he worked for Caterpillar. This guy had never been in trouble in his life. He was at a company function, and he left. He had a couple beers. He was married, had a family, you know, living the perfect life, had an accident on the way home, and he killed somebody. And he was charged with involuntary manslaughter. So to go back to your question, you know, by the grace of God go I. And, you know, truly. And so when I saw staff being that way, you know, you have to pull them to the side and you have to correct them. And don't misunderstand me. There's people in there should never get out.
Fair. Yeah.
You know, they should never get out, but there's other individuals in there who were innocent. There are other innocent people in there who did make mistakes, and it's not my place to judge you, because there's only one judger and a person who judges, and he's not here.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that was truly what I would try to tell my staff, and just try to humble themselves. You know, I had had an individual one time. He was an officer, and he hadn't been there long, and he was really gung-ho, and he wrote a ton of infractions on these offenders. And I had one of the older offenders come to me when I was out walking, and I'd known this guy for a long time, and you know, you over the years you get respect and you give respect. And this guy came to me and he's like, "Hey, you got a problem with some of your young staff, the way they're talking to us, you know, the way they're treating us." And some of them older guys, and they're not going to take that, you know, you just won't. And I said, "Well, you know, I don't want you putting your hands on my staff. Let me go back and address it." So he gave me some names of some people. So I looked it up and pulled up their how many infractions he had wrote. And he had wrote more infractions than me and my two assistant wardens at the time combined in our whole career. And it was over 75 years. So I called him in our conference room after his roll call, and I told my assistant wardens, "I want you to applaud when he comes in." And so we applaud him, and he thinks he's getting ready to get a trophy or something. He doesn't know what he's there for. And I explained to him, "You've wrote more tickets than all three of us combined with over 75 years. And he goes, "Well, they're doing wrong." I said, "So I guarantee you sped coming to work today. So if a cop pulls you over, you should get a ticket. You shouldn't even get a warning. You shouldn't even get a talking to. You should automatically get a ticket because you don't follow the rules on everything." And so I try to educate them. And I said, "And some of the stuff you're coming up with is not true. It's not factual. I'm reading your tickets. They're all saying the same things. All these guys are not saying the same thing to you." So, you know, it was a power struggle. And I was like, at the end of the day, you're going to end up getting somebody hurt based on your power hungriness. So, and so, and so you learn to leverage that, especially with the older staff, because they've been there and seen that, maybe been through that. And so when I would say something like that coming from the warden, I had a couple staff come up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you for that." Yeah. He needed to hear that, you know, and he needs to know, you know.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess in the same vein too, you're talking about, you know, Illinois being a political state, which it's kind of known for. And then also even just like that, there's always this us them mentality, right? And it seems to, you go back time immemorial, right? It's warring tribes and, you know, all the way back. But in the same, like how do you help combat against that? You know, kind of the us versus them. Because I would imagine even in, you know, as administrations changed, like you're saying, you survived Democrats and Republicans. Right. How do you keep yourself not necessarily in the middle? I'm sure you have, you know, convictions and things like these are the hills that I'm willing to die on. Most things are not that hill. I tell people that all the time.
Right. Right.
So know those things, but don't die on every hill. But yeah, how did you do that? Especially, you know, like, did you have unions that worked in the prison system?
Oh yeah. We had, Illinois is very strong union state, very strong union state.
That makes sense. Yeah.
What helped me, and my mentors taught me this: follow the policy, follow the contract book. You don't have to like the contract book. And the way I used to tell people, management and union agreed on these rules in the contract book.
Yeah.
There's things in there that I absolutely did not like, but management agreed to it. So if they have it coming, you give it to them. And what I saw, especially as I started coming up before I got into the executive roles, so So when I started, I was under Republican administration and had been Republican administration for 26 years. And then it went to Democrat administration, and that pendulum swung heavy.
Yeah, I bet.
And so under the Republican administration, they really kicked the union, especially the last administration had kicked the union really hard. And I was looking at things like, where you're saying, like, if there was a disciplinary measure on a staff member and they could show you that you can't do this, management would say, doesn't matter, I'm gonna do what I want to do anyway, which I always had a problem with, because that's not right. It's not what the policy says. It's not what the contract book says. So I always try to stay in the middle. You don't have to like me, but realize that I'm going to be fair about it. And regardless who was in power, I made friends on both sides. At the end of the day, I work for the administration that's in charge. And as you said, I have my own personal convictions on certain things, but I also follow the mission of the department. And so many people lose scope of that. What is our mission? What are we trying to achieve here? Regardless if this person's in or that person's in, they have a way that they think that they can achieve this mission better than the last one. And so sometimes I agreed, sometimes I didn't, but I still followed the policies, and I would push back if it was against the policy. And if you're telling me to do it different, change the policy.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's that's good insight. Yeah, I guess even in the, like in when your last post that you did on LinkedIn, in that newsletter that you're doing, that blog post, it was fantastic, where you're talking about, like the thing you just had mentioned about turning the ship and, bureaucracy, and it takes time, but being able to fall back on those things. It's not, it's not a whim. It's not just
No.
okay. Yeah. It's like, okay, we got to be methodical about this thing. We have
Yes.
to think through this instead of, and if we don't like it, then we'll change it. But we have to, right? But that's further down the line than just what you feel, right?
And there was a lot of people that come in and had those, we're going to change the world type mentality. And it's like, I'd been fortunate enough that I've been there long enough to know that, that's not going to happen. And then I knew, because you had a union, the union was going to fight back, rightfully so.
Sure. Yeah.
There's times that the union was an excellent ally to me, that I couldn't possibly get things done. And, we could work together, because at the end of the day, it wasn't me against them.
Yeah.
It's still moving this mission forward. What's best for the people we serve, and what's best for my staff. It's not because I'm manager of a union, I don't care about you. Yeah, I care about you. I want to know that, how you're doing your mental health. Are you going home at night? Is everything good at home? But you still have a job to do while you're here.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. I'm going to hold you accountable too. Right. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I've been sued many a times for holding people accountable.
And how'd that go?
Yeah. Knock on wood, I haven't lost one yet.
Okay.
Right. And I've been retired going on 2 years now, and I've had several federal cases that I just testified on, but it was never personal.
Right.
And that's where a lot of people get themselves in trouble.
Yes.
They want to come across as the one who, look at me, be scared of me, that tyrant type. And I've worked for some of those. I've worked for some that wouldn't do anything. And I try to be the middle of the road. People are going to make mistakes. And I tell people that, and sometimes you can excuse those mistakes. They were trying something, not to get around a policy. They thought this was the best way to go about it. You made a mistake. I would get phone calls, fix it, move on. It doesn't mean that you need to be a disciplinary action. And I've had some that rose to that of a disciplinary action. Yes, I have to discipline you. And a guy come in and told the truth. And I still had to discipline him, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I gave him as less discipline as I could, because he was very truthful.
Right.
So you have the accountability part is what loses, especially large organizations, even small ones. If you let Jason get away with something and then you hold this one accountable, you lost all morale. You've lost it all.
Yep.
And I see it happen so many times, especially with young leaders. They want the titles, but they don't want the responsibility.
Well put.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, that's so true. I guess in your own career, like what was that because you talked about being one of the youngest wardens, ever. What were some of those defining moments, and what were the things that separated you, as that happened? And I guess in the same way as you were, the assistant director and promoting people, I'm sure you promoted people, and what were those defining characteristics maybe in yourself, but in other people that you saw that you said, okay, yeah, this person can handle the weight of responsibility, because that's what it is, right? It's not the title. It's about the weight of responsibility that you're putting on people.
It is the weight of responsibility. And unfortunately, we didn't always have the luxury to hire the best person for the job.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Oh
Good to
no,
know.
no, because it's an at-will employee. So those at those levels, they can be patronage jobs. So there was a lot of people that would come off the street that, hey, they were going to say, you're going to hire Jason. Oh, okay. Where am I hiring him at? Where am I putting him at? In some of those positions. And so if I experienced something like that, I tried to put the person where it was most beneficial for them, especially if they're having to learn everything. You don't want to put them in a maximum security facility.
Sure.
You would want to put them in a minimum security facility, and maybe with a great supporting network around them so they can get up to speed and learn the processes. Um, but as far as me, what I looked at, when I became a warden, and then I end up, so my peers at the time, some of them I worked for. So now they're my peers.
Yeah.
And then, and a year and a half later, I became their boss as a deputy director. That was a little difficult for me. And I had another good mentor. He's my big brother. I'm gonna say his name on here, Eddie Jones. Eddie Jones took me to the side and said, I understand that, you feel compelled with some of these guys. I was your boss at one time. Now you're my boss's boss. You have to earn that respect, and you never let them call you by your first name. It's either Mr. Garnett or Deputy Garnett. It's not an ego thing. It's just because it's a paramilitary organization. And so I had a meeting with my wardens one day, at that time I was probably 34, 35, and I got guys in there close to retirement, and I'm telling them, you're going to call me deputy or Mr. And I told them it wasn't about my ego. It's about respect. Now you see me after hours, I'm Jason. I mean, my mom didn't name me deputy.
Yeah.
She named me Jason. So,
Yeah.
so that was kind of a defining moment, but it kind of got me over the hump. And then I looked for people's work ethic and what you stood for. I didn't care about your politics. I didn't care about that. What do you stand for, and are you wanting to make a change in what we're doing and make the Illinois Department of Corrections one of the best in the nation? That was my goal with anything I do. I want to be the best at it all. If you think small, you'll be small. If you think big, you'll be big. I mean, truly. But there's a process that goes with it. Truly a process that goes with it. So I looked for people of like mindset. And then over time, I've listened to some speakers that you learn, because before I knew Jason's my go-to guy. Give it to Jason. Well, then you're riding that horse and you're going to break them down, because then you got
Right.
this other person over here who's not really, your go-to person, and you don't give them nothing. And so I learned to equally push that out, and sometimes just giving that person an opportunity and letting them know you believe in them. That's all they needed,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and you can get them on your team real
Yeah.
quick.
Give them to shine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when Ray and I were talking about, like, what are we going to call the podcast, and we kept coming back to, so he co-hosts with me sometimes, couldn't be here today. He's a junior high school counselor, so middle school
Okay.
school counselor, and so he's just a big teddy bear of a guy. He's half Samoan, half Filipino. Played football. I mean, he could crush you, kind of thing, and but just a big teddy bear. And And the thing that's so fascinating is he just talks about, and all the time he's like, I just get in front of classrooms and I get in front of teachers. I'm like, hey, it comes down to the choice. And so as we developed this, we said, there's, you've heard like the pain of discipline or the pain of regret or
Hmm.
the slide edge or the compound effect. And it's all the same stuff, meaning the choices that you make over time are either going to put you in a positive trajectory of life,
Yes.
or by default, you're going to go through a negative trajectory of life, right? Entropy is alive and well. And so those choices that we make us. And it's not like we make good choices all the time. Like you said, there's
Right.
plenty of dumb things that I've done that yes, probably could have got me incarcerated, especially in my younger days. And thank God I didn't have social media back then. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So, but outside of that, so then thinking through, like, those are the small choices, right? Not brushing your teeth today is not going to make your teeth fall out. But you compound that over time, it will. But then there's also defining like choices and hard choices that you've had to make that were really like that fork in the road. And you say, okay, I made this hard choice, and whether it was the right choice or the wrong choice, we all have those. And so
Hmm.
I'd be curious for you, like, what is one of those hardest choices that you had to make that you can share, or you're willing to share, and what was the result, either positive or negative?
I had a choice at a younger age. I was in corrections that politics had changed. As I said before, the Republicans had been in power for 26 years, and when it changed over, they brought a lot of people from the outside, and they got rid of a lot of knowledge based on politics. And a lot of those guys were my mentors that I looked up to. I didn't always agree with everything they did, but then I knew they had the knowledge. And so I happened to be in a vehicle with some people that at the time were some power brokers, so to speak. And a personal friend of mine had been let go. Um, and they asked me, had I talked to him? And I'm thinking, oh boy, because this administration let him go. But I decided at that time, nobody's going to define who I talk to and who I don't. He was a personal friend. I didn't agree with what he did at the time, but he did what he thought he needed to do at the time. And I said, yes, I have. And well, then they started, well, how's he doing? I said, he's not doing good. He doesn't have a job, you know. Um, and so the conversation led on, and I think they respected me for it. And it was a defining moment for me because I'm not going to hide who I am or who I know, um, especially based on politics or whatever the case, or you don't like somebody doesn't mean I'm not going to like them. That's one. Another one was, now that you really got my curiosity going in my brain, um, I had a defining moment with a boss who, during the same administration, was quick to. They would say, we're going to save $1 today, but to, 2 years down the road, it's going to cost you 5 type thing, But it's like, look at me. And so I was on a call, and the conversation went down. There was about 5 or 6 of us on the call, and my integrity means you can't take that from me. And so this individual said, well, they were trying to change something at this facility that I was supervising at the time, one of my facilities I supervised, and he was my boss. So he was over the whole state at the time. He was a chief, and I was a deputy. And so he said, well, Jason, we had this conversation. And I said, we've never had this conversation. And I said it on the call with some of my peers. And I said, sir, with all due respect, it is my job. I feel like it's my job if I see you stepping in a puddle to say, sir, there's a puddle there. And if you say, I know the puddle's there, then I'll stomp it with you. But you're getting ready to step into a puddle on what you're getting ready to do. And he was very quick to put me in my place. I mean, you oversee, 7 facilities? I said, yes, sir. He said, and I oversee all of them. And needless to say, my temperature was rising.
Sure.
You put me in my place. He's my boss. And, but I didn't back down from him. And he said something else. And so he kept saying, we had this conversation. I said, the only conversation we had was on this date and this time. You never mentioned this to me. And if you want to do it, that's fine. We'll do it. It's not going to work, but we'll do it. And he got so mad, he slammed down the phone with everybody else on the call. And needless to say, I was a little heated too, but I kept my composure. And then his assistant said, now, Jason, we did have this conversation, and I let him have it. And I said, we've never had this conversation. Well, fast forward to the next day, I happened to be at our headquarters, and the director comes to me and says, hey, buddy, some people went downtown on you. I'm like, went downtown? And he's like, yeah, they went to the Capitol. You're not a team player, they're saying. So they were trying to fire me. And luckily, the director stood up for me, and he's like, I know him. And if he said something's not going to work, we need to listen to what he's saying. He's not that type of person that's just trying to buck the system. And needless to say, it was difficult times for me for a while. But you have to stand on your principle and you stand on your morals. And I did. And throughout time, people knew that about me. I thought I was going to be let go, and they tried to, and it didn't happen. So, but throughout time, that's why I believe in treating people right and doing the right thing. And the funny thing about it is that the one warden whose facility they was trying to change, I told him I used to be the warden there, and I'm like, you can't do it. And he was off the street, but he was scared and he didn't want to tell him no. And I said, you're going to end up wearing this when it's all said and done because it can't happen. Well, they went ahead and did it, and he was paying $45,000 in overtime a pay period. And governor's office started calling and said, what's going on down there?
Yeah.
Well, during that time, they moved me away from that facility. They gave me 2 other facilities and took that one and give it to somebody else who wouldn't fight them on it.
Yeah, just gonna play ball.
Yeah. So the warden calls me and says, what am I going to do? I said, figure it out. You said you could do it. And I told you couldn't. There's nothing you can do. You got to hope that they're going to give you more staff. If not, your overtime's going to continue to climb, and you're going to have to go answer for it. So those hard decisions, and you got to stay to what's right and what's true. And sometimes the backlash, it hurts. But at the end of the day, as one of my bosses told me, you got to look yourself in the mirror.
Yeah. No, that's good. When you talked earlier about being promoted and then demoted, is that one of those demotions? I guess that wasn't a demotion. It was just, you're taking facilities. And
that one
I guess
wasn't.
The question is like how, we all have obstacles, right? We all have setbacks in the journey. So how do you approach those, and how have you approached them?
So one of the hardest ones was I was when I was assistant director. And usually, especially from a director, assistant director, if you leave those positions, they walk you out the door. They normally will not keep you in administration. And I knew something was coming. I could feel it. I knew something wasn't right because I was supposed to go up for confirmation, and they kept pushing my confirmation off. And I'm like, I'm not getting a good feeling at all. And so it was actually right before Christmas that I got a phone call. And there were some people who tried to get me discharged. But there were some other people who said, we're not firing him. He didn't do anything wrong. It was politics at play. So they moved me from assistant director back to a warden. I was a very angry individual. However, my philosophy was when I walked in that facility, those people at the facility had nothing to do with why I was there. So I tried to be the best warden I could be. I believe everything happens for a reason. Sometimes we don't always know why. Little personal information during that time, my health wasn't the best. I just had surgery on my hip, and I was traveling all around the state, and I was wore out. And, going back to be a warden at the time I could do that standing on my head, given the other position. So at that point in time, I went back and finished up my PhD. And so everybody that was involved with me getting moved ended up going away, and I was the only one left. And in the same administration, they promoted me back up to chief of parole, which I was before I became the assistant director. And I went back to my old position before I became the assistant director.
So funny. That's
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
so
and
goofy.
so, and I had a colleague of mine. I had moved her to that facility as an assistant warden when I was assistant director.
Yeah.
And she was a friend. She was a friend of mine. And I'll never forget her one day. She came to me and she knew I was angry. She said, I know you and I know your passion and I know what you stand for and how hard you work. But she said, I'll never forget. She said, baby, let me tell you something. Good Lord's moving you out of the way. You need to rest. You need to get your stuff together. You're going to be back on top. And now everybody's going to see, because they were blaming a lot of stuff on you, that it wasn't you. And that's truly what happened. So I was back in that position as a warden for maybe a year and 4 months, and then right back to chief of parole.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. And I know we like in our previous conversation, you just had alluded to that, that, I'm a Christian and we had talked about
Hmm.
that, like, how has faith defined that, helped in those situations? And I guess, what is your faith journey, if you don't mind sharing that?
So I've always, I wouldn't say I grew up in the church, but I always went, we went to church. And so throughout life, especially as I got older, you start questioning things, was this true or is that not true, or, you really can't see it or touch it type
Yep.
thing. But there's some things that I had went through at a young age, that was very hard for me. And I didn't understand why it was happening, but I have a praying family, and I had a very strong support system, and they they would talk to me, and I went and talked to a pastor, I got through some very difficult times, and I thought, at the time it was all unfair. It was nothing that was I did to myself. And so I got through it. Some of the darkest times, what my darkest times, not, other people's had worse for sure. And then when there was a time where I promoted and they got rid of the whole class of titles, captains, there's 213 of us. They got rid of all of us. And the title just did away with it. So either you could go back to officer or you get promoted. And so depending on what facilities that, it was really hard to get some of those positions. And I was fortunate enough to get them. So throughout my career, especially at 32 years old, I went 21 years. I was the longest, I am the longest standing at-will employee in the Illinois Department of Corrections. So even through those times where I've been moved and politics came at me, I was able to look back over them, and God always had me. So not to say I still don't get concerned, um, but I know He's got me for
Yeah.
whatever it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
And I stay true to that. And the older I get, the more I know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Truly.
mean, that's so good. I mean, uh, it's amazing as you zoom out in life, and it's easy to get so focused on just like, here's the obstacle right in front of me, and you get so tunnel vision right on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the more and more you can take a step back, in time and space, and the complexity of whatever. And it doesn't necessarily, your friend who just gave you that, like, hey, God's just benching you a little bit so you can heal
Yep.
up, right? It's because you're in injury timeout. It's not because you're
Right.
not a star player, right? And yeah, I had a similar situation. I was the CEO of a company, and we weren't doing well, and then the board basically came to me and said, yeah, you're benched. And so, when those things happen, right, it's just like, you're flooded with emotions, and you're pissed off,
Sure.
and you're upset, and all the different things. But then looking back on it, right, once you have a little more perspective, then man, that was 100% the right call, and
Mm-hmm.
it was 100% what I needed, because I wouldn't have taken the break that I needed to. Like, I
Exactly.
wasn't doing well. I was in burnout and didn't really know it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, that's good stuff. So
I
what
get that.
now? Okay.
No, I say I get that because there's a couple times as assistant director, you're talking about burnout, and I didn't really, my philosophy is you're not going to outwork me. I'm not going to burn out. But there was a couple times truly that I woke up at the hotel and I'm like, I don't even know what city I'm in. I mean, it was,
Mm.
it was, you know, it was that point, and I was really getting thin and, you know, just all over the place because I felt like I have to lead by example. And you got 12,000, you know, staff. I want to be seen. I want to, you know, hey, this guy is really out here for us. So yeah, yeah, I needed benched, and I wouldn't have finished my PhD.
Yeah. And what did you get your? This is always a dangerous question to ask, but what what did you do your PhD on?
Public administration.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
how so? Because I don't have a PhD, and I joke with people that I'm one of the dumb guys in one of our buildings because they're full of engineers. And I asked one of the guys. I said, "So Jonathan, what did you get your PhD in?" And he said, "Well," he said, "You know how you can take individual photons of light in an array?" And I was like, "This is going to be a long conversation."
Right. Right.
I don't even
Right.
understand that. But anyway, so in that, you know, with public, like what was the main thesis, and what were the things that you saw and see that was, you know, different? Because that's usually the big thing, right? You're coming up with a original thought and developing it, correct?
So my thought, yeah. So my dissertation was on um, sex offender laws in Illinois. So one of the things I knew was our laws are very stringent and very strict to the point where they're not doing what they should be doing. I'm not that I'm a proponent for sex offenders. That's not what I was trying to say, but there's a better way we could supervise it. There's a better way to go about doing what we're doing. So sex offender populations usually have a lower recidivism rate than most. In
Interesting.
Illinois, it's the highest. So, there, we had a lot of, and there's a lot of different factors that go into the recidivism rate. So I took our stats from our state, and I went through and I broke them down by, you know, race and how people were being violated back into the facilities. And I basically come up with four categories. And the research showed that Illinois obviously had a higher rate. In Illinois, when you are let out of prison and you do a mandatory supervised release or go on parole, you have to have a approved host site for you that you're going to live at. If you do
Okay.
not have one, you will not be released. And so we violate you. Other states can release you homeless. Yeah. So, and then you have certain, you know, with sex offenders, a 500-foot rule, churches, you would have some city ordinance would make it 2,000 or 1,000 foot, which made it even harder to get these individuals out. And then there were certain laws in 2006 that were adopted that just really hamstrung that population. So at one point in time, we had approximately 3 to 4,000 people locked up that should be out on parole. That's
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
facility and a
Wow.
half. So that's a lot of taxpayer money. And my stance was let's get these individuals out on parole so we can supervise them. We can give them wraparound resources, so there's no more victims and they don't recidivate. Because what would happen is if that person was violated, they could do their parole time locked up in prison, and we have to let them out, and they're just free. So let's supervise them. And so that's it's so what I really want to do is bring it to the legislature's attention, not to get rid of laws, but let's modify them. Let's change up some of these laws so it better serves the public. It better serves the person that's coming out. But how do you have a politician say, let's rework a sex offender law? That's suicide for their career.
Yeah.
So
Politically, right.
yeah,
Yeah.
politically it's
Yeah.
suicide. So you had to have a commission that would come in of both parties and say, okay, let's do it for the right reason, all of us. Not that we're
Yeah.
being less on crime,
Yeah.
but being smart about it. And here's a
Yeah.
study to prove your laws are not working.
Yeah. Oh man, that would I can't imagine like that sounds hard because I would, you know, like we were talking about like the, you know, Republican Democrat, and it seems like it's getting
Hmm.
more and more, you know, polarizing. But the you know, probably even looking at like, well, this state's done a really good job. Like statistically, like here's all the things they've done really well. And I'm sure there's people, especially in politics, who are like, well, because it's that state, we don't want to hear about it, right? You know, like because it
Exactly.
might make our team look bad, you know, instead of just like, no, what is the actual best solution here? You know, it's not about
So,
that.
So it's funny you say that. So one of the ones was Illinois just went under this administration. It was a few years back where legal marijuana became legal,
Mm.
certain amounts.
Is it in Illinois?
Uh, mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
It is. So I, as parole chief, said, okay, it's legal. Are we going to allow parolees to smoke marijuana, even though it's against the policy? So I ended up doing a survey of states in the union that had already legalized marijuana. And of course, I thought Colorado would be like, oh yeah, no big deal. They had one of the most stingiest laws when it came to parolees. And so Oregon had one of the best. And so based on what my research found, is because it changed my philosophy as well. I was not a proponent of marijuana. However, what I've learned over time is if you have somebody that's got cancer and it's helping, medicinal purposes,
Yeah, sure.
absolutely, and that's where we changed the stance. It was a case by case scenario. If you went through the steps to get your medical card as far as you can obtain, and you have an illness or a sickness and a doctor signed off it, who am I to say you can't have it?
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's kind of the way the policy shifted. And then just because if you didn't have that and you was just smoking and smoking, that was going to be a problem. But
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
so
it was funny because even living here in Oregon, I mean, Montana, I think was one of the first states. That's where I'm from originally, and so for medicinal purposes, they're one of the first states to do that. And then Oregon was one of the first with Colorado,
mhm.
to legalize it for recreational purposes. And so even internally in companies, having to change those policies, it's like, wait, okay, are we okay with this? And it's been interesting. Even like I was saying,
Yeah.
my dad's best friend was in law enforcement, and so many guys that were on the street, like, man, I would much rather deal with somebody stoned than somebody drunk. So, like,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
so it's like, it's just interesting, like even how even the public perception of all of that has changed. It's just interesting. And so, and same with like, I mean, there's, in Oregon and even in Montana, there's so many laws that, even the guys that were in law enforcement are like, yeah, it's not our job to create the law. We're just here
Right.
to like, at the end of the day, if we have a problem with this, like you're saying, like we got to go back and change the law. We got to go back and change the policy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah, and unfortunately, it's easy to get mad at the messenger, instead of, you know,
It is, and that's where a lot of times communication is key. Especially if you're dealing with stakeholders, and my world. A lot of times, for me, in those positions, was going and talking to police chiefs. It was talking to states attorneys and explaining to them why we're doing what we're doing, and a lot of times they didn't understand. Even the legislators, hey, it's not as simple as what you think it is. Let me explain it to you. And educating them and like, oh, we did not know that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So this is where our stance is, and this is why our stance is this way. Instead of saying, yeah, no, we're not going to do that.
yeah, oh, for sure, yeah, seeing the downstream effects, that it's like, yeah, you're seeing this piece of it, but the bigger pieces, the bigger effects could be detrimental. Which is it'd be a good segue, because with so you've been retired now for a while, and then tell me about the consulting and the things that you're doing now.
So right now, I basically do leadership workshops. I do some speaking engagements, um, some strategic planning. So I have a team of consultants, depending on what the job is. I really like the strategic planning part, but I have consultants that come in and do that based like on your framework. I mean, truly. But I will help with the coaching and leadership styles. So I will come in and facilitate that, and they handle the other stuff.
Yeah,
Um, and I really like that because I can walk in an organization, as I'm sure you can, and you can say, "Oh boy, I see some issues here." They kind of stand out to you, and you want to be able to give people a roadmap. And one of the things that, myself and one of my colleagues, we just had a call yesterday with this lady in Africa. They're possibly wanting to hire a company to come there and help them, and it's a huge company.
which country?
Um,
Well, yeah,
Namibia,
Namibia,
yeah,
something,
something
yeah.
like that. And so we had a great call. It's a telecommunication company. She broke it down to us. I think they're the largest there.
Mm,
So hopefully it's a great opportunity for us. But one of the things that we told her is, unlike a lot of consulting groups, we don't want to stay on your payroll forever. It'd be nice, but
yeah,
that's not our goal.
yeah,
Our goal is to bring you some solutions and help foster and get it to where you can replicate this.
Hmm.
So whether it be your policies, whether it be procedures, whatever the case may be. So then as you get a new employee come on, here it is. You don't need us. And then we provide support for so many days or so many months. And then if you need something down the road, but we truly kind of want to be your training wheels and then push you along and go. We don't want to stay on forever. And we're not necessarily a cookie cutter. Every organization is not the same. Everybody has their own pain points. So we want to address those pain points. And it's not based on, you know, what the leadership thinks the pain points are. You have to do that gap analysis to see what's the people on the front line saying the pain points are, and then you got to mesh them.
Oh, for sure. That's why I loved what you were saying about, knowing the mechanic or knowing
Yeah,
the guy over here in maintenance or whomever, within the organization, because that's where you get the real information. And
absolutely. Absolutely. And the same in an organization. And so I really enjoy that, so I will be retired 2 years at the end of July. My company has only been up and going since August of last year because I had to sit out a year for conflicts of interest for my job. I didn't have to, but every job that I would get, I had to run it through Office of Inspector General,
mm,
and I wasn't going to do all that.
sure.
So at the time, I just started working on my company, my foundation, my
Yeah.
policies, my procedures, and as you know, everything's always a pivot. There's things I'm learning. I need to. I have a lot of I have several services, but I need to kind of fine tune them a little bit more, and to come down to what, hey, these are my three or four
Yeah.
main ones.
Yeah.
I have a part of it that I haven't introduced yet. I want to come up with subject matter experts, and I have 6 categories where my company will provide subject matter experts. If you're going through a lawsuit, if you need an engineer, if you need people in the healthcare field, IT, behavioral service, HR, then you would be able to come to my company. We would go to a clearinghouse and we would provide you people.
Oh, yeah. That's really smart. Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of
And
sense. Okay.
go ahead.
I was going to
No,
say,
you go
like,
ahead.
who's your ideal client then in?
To be honest with you, my ideal client is I'll do from startup to C-suite. Right now, locally for me, there's a lot of small businesses, and I'm seeing some of the pain points. I'm listening to them talk, and I'm like, man, you need to let me come in and help you. I don't need a full team for this.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
just a couple little tweaks that you need because it's costing you money. Um, and if you don't fix it now and you're wanting to scale your business, it's just going to cost you more money in the long run. And you're going to end up having that check engine light come on. And then that car is going to stop on your business is going to stop either when you got one of your biggest clients or in the worst time that it could be for an employee to walk out on you because they just can't deal with it anymore. So I like that. I love working with big organizations, but in all fairness, a lot of times I can't bid on those RFP because you have to have 5 years experience, which I've got the experience
Sure.
personally, but my company doesn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to have that capital behind you to bid on these big jobs. So I've partnered with a couple of big conglomerates, especially if it comes into the correction side with parole or probation, because
Makes
it's kind
sense.
of my expertise. And they told me if you have a job like that, tell them you want it, and we would try to come in and bid it, and then they would subcontract me, which is the best of both worlds because
Yeah. No kidding.
I can still learn from them and how their company does stuff, and I can type up my expertise on what I see.
Yeah. That's great. So when you're asked to speak, when you said you're doing some public speaking, like what are the, one or two big keynotes that you get most excited about?
Um, I get excited about just on how I see leadership today and where I see the failures at. A lot of people, from when I came up the ranks, everybody started at the bottom and worked their way up, so that you automatically had that respect. Today, you have people that are coming right out of college and going right into these big offices, and they have that mindset that I don't need to listen to you because you're on the front line. Leadership today, in my opinion, is probably harder than it has been in the past because you got 4 different generations in the workforce right now. And they're all learning at different levels and how they operate. You've got the baby boomers still there. You got Gen X, you got millennials and Gen Zs. So you've got all these different personalities and different generations. It's difficult to be a leader and to do it correctly. And I believe some of the stuff I talk about, I really like Anthropic. I can never say his name, the CEO of Anthropic.
Oh yeah.
but I like what he stands for, and I don't know all of it. I'm not an AI guy, but I know where, he had Meta, Mark poached his engineers, and was going to pay him $100 million signing bonus. And his philosophy was, go. I'm not changing my mission statement. And you're still going to be a day behind us because what you're taking with us, we're moving on tomorrow. And the majority of the people, there was only a few that took it. The majority didn't even open emails. They loved the culture that he had created there. And they have the highest retention rate than any other AI company.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
So,
I did
and
not
so
know that
what,
about Anthropic.
yeah, he it's Mario, or I can't never say his name, but he has morals,
Right.
and the company has morals. And he said, "I'm not backing off my mission statement." Yeah, it was scary, and I didn't match it. If you want to take it, go.
Yeah, right.
And his pay structure was similar because you might come in with this great degree, but if you're starting out, everybody starts out the same. I don't care what you're bringing to the table, and you work your way up. That way you don't have that fluctuation. So,
Yeah.
so that's one of the big things that I really like talking to people, because we've all been to seminars. We've all been to workshops. We've all been to trainings. And it's like, okay, you got this talking head up here and this or that. But I really try to hone in on, what's your mission statement of your company? Do you even know it? If you don't know it, how can you get your people to follow you? Where are you taking them to? And so, get them to think, learn their leadership style. A lot of people don't know their leadership style, and in certain situations you might need to change it up a little bit. I mean, you are who you are, but given your environment, you might have to change it up. So, I potentially have a speaking engagement where I was asked to talk about, coming up at the end of July, with a bunch of elected officials on politics and how I survived so long with politics throughout the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
Because some people are dealing with it with their boards, county boards, or whatever the case may be. So,
Sure.
That'll be an interesting one, and how I scope it, because at the end of the day, it comes back just to educating the people to what you want and why you want it.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. And if we get rid of the labels, behind names and things like that,
Yes.
it's amazing how similar views are, like
Mm-hmm.
really. And there's always fringes, and there's always things, that are out there. But at the end of the day, it's like, no, a good idea is usually a good idea.
It is, and you have to explain it. I had another boss of mine, and he's a good friend of mine, but he had a problem dealing with people who, out of the governor's office, he was like, they're kids. Yeah, but they're your boss. It's up to you to educate them. You got to educate them. Yes, it takes time, but to get what you want, to achieve what you want, you need to explain to them the why.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to, coming full circle with the conversation when you talked about being a young leader yourself. Okay, if they're kids, it's amazing how much smarter my parents get the older I get. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
yes.
So it's kind of the same. Yeah. They don't know what they don't know. And that's
absolutely
that's the biggest blind spots that most people have, myself included. I don't know what I don't know. Like there's things that and I don't know the right question to ask, or I don't know the right person to ask that's going to actually have my best intention in mind, that is going to give me some sound advice, right? And some wise counsel. And so, yeah. So I tell people all the time, like, when you're building an inner circle, you have to have people that are, kind of your running mates, but you also have, like you said, you've got to have mentors and people in your life, whether it's parenting or being married, or, whatever these facets of life are, that's like, okay, I can respect that. I see what you've done here with your kids. Your kids still like you, and they're, in their 20s.
Right.
You did something okay along the way. I'm not sure, of course you have bumps and bruises along the way, but I want to learn from you, So,
yeah. I mean, and I've always, I keep going back, and like, as you look in that rearview mirror of how your life was, even outside of my career, I was always around people that was very knowledgeable and older than me.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so, if you don't know your history, it's bound to repeat itself. So you always have to have that historical knowledge, um, whether it be in business, whether it be in corrections or whatever, and not be afraid to say, I don't know. Educate me, teach me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's
Truly.
so good.